Okay, so we're going to continue looking at urban dynamics today. The two we're going to look at are counter-urbanisation and decentralisation. We're going to start with counter-urbanisation. So, counter-urbanisation is the movement out of a large city to a rural area. So basically it's the opposite of urbanisation. It's when people move from urban areas to rural areas, so urban to rural migration. Often these are affluent people in retirement. Some of them are looking for a sea change or a tree change. So a sea change, they might be moving to a coastal area. So for example, people might retire in Port Macquarie. A tree change could be to a rural area inland, so they might retire in, say, Bowral. This has become more popular as a lot of older people are able to afford to retire. They are also living longer, which then means they have a longer retirement period. This started to happen around the world, and it has slowed down as of the 1990s, but it does still occur. So there's a few factors that made this possible. So firstly, people became more affluent between the 1960s and the 1980s, which meant they had more disposable income. And that meant they were able to also invest in holiday homes, or for some of them are just retirement homes. Secondly, people's retirement funds became higher. This is partially due to the introduction of compulsory superannuation. And they had more disposable income when they were retired, and they weren't attached to cities for employment, so they didn't have to continue to work. Also, people, because they're living longer, they're able to look after themselves better, and they have longer time to enjoy that. And also, when they have moved to these places, it's actually stimulated more employment in those places, which has in turn created local demand for business, attracted more tourism, attracted more families that are actually younger, not just retirees, which means that these communities have actually improved as well. If you go to the PowerPoint version of this and click on the hyperlink, it takes you to this article, Sea Change or Tree Change. You'll notice it's a website for people who are over 60, but it talks about some of the main retirement hotspots that people move to when they want to move away from the city. So I just thought it'd be interesting to see, for you to see what places they are. Okay, so now we're going to move on to decentralisation. The decentralisation is the dispersal of activities and people from large urban areas to smaller urban areas and rural communities. So sometimes these are still within the metropolitan area. So for example, there's been a lot of talk of Parramatta being created as Sydney's second CBD, and for Sydney to have multiple CBDs, rather than just focus on the current Sydney CBD. Now this is for a number of reasons, partially because of urban consolidation, but also to disperse our facilities and our amenities. Some of these things also move to rural communities. So I think it mentioned in the textbook that Armidale has a Australian headquarters of something. Can't remember what it is now. I have to check now. So it's the home of pesticides and veterinary medicine. So that way they have moved an industry or a particular segment, so people have employment in other areas, and hopefully it'll attract people. Another reason why people move can be explained by the bid-rent theory. So it's a geographical economic theory that refers to how price and demand for real estate changes as the distance towards the CBD increases. It states that different land users will compete with one another for land close to the city centre. This is based upon the idea that retail establishments wish to maximise their profitability, so they are more willing to pay for land close to the CBD and less land further away from this area. This theory is based upon the reasoning that the more accessible an area, the more profitable. So if you look at the diagram on the slide, the arrows are pointing towards particular lines. So for retail, it's showing the money for rent per acre is lowered as you go further away from the CBD. And similar for manufacturing and residential. And it increases as you go towards the CBD. Now, this is as decentralisation occurs because of a number of push and pull factors. Some of the push factors is that centres of cities often have a lot of traffic congestion, lack of space, and rising land values. And then often many manufacturing other activities are outside the CBD, so it attracts people to move there because there's positions and employment. Pull factors that attract people to these areas that are now decentralized, the areas that have been created outside the cities, is because there's cheap and abundant land, low land taxes, good highway and railway access, and sometimes there's actually incentives by the local government. Now, you could argue that moving to the Central Coast is an example of decentralisation, and there's a number of people who have previously lived in Sydney who now live there because you're still able to commute to the city. We even have teachers at school that live on the Central Coast and drive to school each day. However, that is still relatively expensive compared to places who are even further from the city. Okay, what I'd like you to do is go to the textbook and read pages 172 to 176 and add to your notes. And then I would like you to complete questions 1, 4, 10, and 11. Once you've done that, I'd like you to do a little bit of research into the idea that Sydney may have more than one CBD in the future. I mentioned before that been discussing and then really be moving towards Parramatta to be the second CBD. I would like you to look at newspaper articles and collect at least 3 newspaper articles that discuss additional Sydney CBDs. And from those articles, I would like you to add examples to your notes. Okay, so here's the table again. You can now add information for counter-urbanisation and decentralisation. So please make sure you go and fill that out and include case study evidence.